Marshall has left us in this place of thinking across systems. And I wonder if I could come to you at the end, after picking on some of the other more specific questions, and ask you if you could help us start thinking about what are some of the commonalities and differences among the different approaches and practices that we have seen. And you can pick a particular area, for example, consensus building, or you can speak generally, because we have gone from the Oromo Gada system to the Kurukan Fuga Charter to the Her Isa, and then ended up at Awale. And I'll come back to you and ask that question. But in the meantime, I did want to go to some of the specific questions that are asking people to think very specifically on some of the case studies. So Zelalem, if I may start with you, there is a question for you from Diran Sumoni, who asks, what do you see as the possibilities for inclusive governance in modern Ethiopia? That is, which includes the Gada heritage in the running of the multinational state. And he's asking actually if specifically, and I know this is a big question, so maybe you can just give us a more concise answer, but if you could refer to the work of Asmarom Leges, and on one hand, and then of the poet laureate Tsegaye Gabremedin on the other, in articulating the imperative of inclusive governance. So really, what is the contribution of Gada philosophy to governance in contemporary Ethiopia, but also in the whole region more specifically? And then I'm going to just give a question to Musa so that you can start thinking about this, and then I'll come back and start really with Zelalem, and then go down the list. Musa, Joseph Okumu is wondering how you would rate the success of HER as a dispute resolution mechanism, and to what extent would you apply to electoral disputes in the Great Lakes region and the larger sub-Saharan Africa? And then Martial, Ibrahima Thiam is asking, je me demande si la Constitution, avec toute sa rigidité, est nécessaire pour faire société. So I'm going to start with Zelalem, and then go to Ali Musa, and then come to Martial, and then I'll go back to Ibrahim, because I've given him a very big question to think us through, and then we'll take another round of questions. Zelalem?
Yes, thank you so much. Really, we appreciate for the chance. I think the question is such very specific and also not really easy to respond, but let me try. I think to begin with, I wrote a thesis back in 2012. My thesis really particularly go with the question of the audience, and the question that the idea that what's really the contribution of Gada for Ethiopia. The title of the thesis was When Gada Rules in a Federal State. So I will send you the link, and there are many contributions that Gada can make. To be precise, as you know that the Oromo people become really large in number in Northeast Africa because of the culture of Budifacha, which means, and also Mogasa, which means you can make larger ethnic group part of you. It's not a matter of assimilation or subjugation, but in a way that you can attract the other larger group to be part of you. And there is no one ethnic group which do not really have any relation with Oromo. So almost all ethnic groups, almost maybe to the peripheries, except that the middle of Ethiopia and northern part of Kenya, the Oromos are really the largest, mixed with all ethnic groups in Ethiopia. This comes from the culture. It's the culture of inclusivity, including different linguistic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. So as the question itself, Asmarom was from Tigray and from Eritrea, and the poet laureate was also mixed, Amhara and also Oromo. The Oromo traveled back maybe in 16th century from the northern part of Ethiopia to southern part of Ethiopia. So the history tells some wrong way that they traveled from south to north, leaving the debate aside. There is no any place that lacks the Oromo names, places, space from Eritrea to that of southern part of Ethiopia to that of Kenya. And this indicates that the Geda system really more inclusive and be considered as very important if considered in modern context. I think it is more inclusive. The other point that I would like to add is that if value or idea that could really surpass any values or principles that we have now, I think we can learn a great lesson from Geda. One example is that how leaders are really trained from early on, from early childhood to today. So that kind of passage from age 0 age to that of until the age of 80 and maybe until the days, every life is structured. And that structure is not rigid, in fact, but we can say that can we structure it in such a way that we can train our youth, our generations step by step, and then they become leaders. Leaders will not be appointed because of the fact that they talk well, they impress the public, but because they have good deeds in practice. So Geda can really contribute in that regard. One final thing that I would like to add is that Athens, for example, if you say democracy from the Western liberal context, was a small or city kind of democracy. I think Geda, in modern context, some claim that Geda is really particularly being implemented in very small community, small in number. But I do argue that idea matters than figures or numbers. So our excellence has to be the point of departure. So what I want to argue is that we can learn many points from Geda, but adopting it requires thinking in a very alternative way. So I have published some works, how we can really use Geda in modern constitutions and so on and so forth. Maybe I will share the materials. Without any further ado, I think this would really answer your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And indeed, this is the beginning of a conversation, and we hope that in the years to come, we will continue to have more conversations and share more of the research and hopefully catalyze more research in some of these systems and how we can use them. So thank you very much. Let me go to Ali Musa, and your question was on hair as a dispute resolution mechanism.
Yes, thank you very much. How to measure the success of the hair? Well, we measure it because not only the hair is applied in the bush and in the countryside, but now more and more in the urban setting and settlement in all the cities in the Horn of Africa, because it proves it is practicability in a certain way, and the trust that the people give to the hair. In a certain way, today, the application of the hair as a penal code mostly, not that much as a constitutional, as a constitution, but as a penal code, is filling the gap in the urban cities, the gap of the modern justice, which is not only expensive, which is slow, which is corrupted, and people in Djibouti, in some town in Ethiopia, in Somalia, are going to the traditional court because they trust much more. So yes, and I think so. The spread of the hair outside its natural context, which has been the bush, in the urban city, shows in a certain way the success that it had as a penal code. As a constitution, well, we have the nation state with their system, and of course, that is not applied because that definitely challenge the modern state power, and that's a real problem. Now, how it is applied in the electoral dispute? Well, it has been used, for instance, in Djibouti during the colonization, and even afterwards, when there was dispute, the politician used also to come to the higher court to settle the differences. It has been used. Sometimes it succeeded to resolve, sometimes not. But it's becoming less and less difficult to use the hair for that kind of electoral dispute. Why? Because the concept of respectability, honorability have disappeared. We have a new kind of politician who don't care about all this ethical framework and foundation that I have explained. Since they don't believe to that ethics, well, the hair is couldn't work because it has not a force to enforce it is a decision. So if its application posed already a problem in the specific context where it was born, in Djibouti, in the Somali context, I think it would be problematic to be used in electoral dispute in for instance, the Great Lakes. However, I think, as I think we have discussed, when we talk about reusing an indigenous governance, the idea is not taking it as it is, because for that we have to have the same social and cultural context, but the philosophy of this, the way, the listening that it implies, the search for the consensus that it promotes can be used in any situation. This is beyond the context. So yes, in a certain way, this political philosophy behind the system can be helpful, I think, to settle other disputes in other regions in Africa, at least.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'd like, if we have time, to go back to that question of applicability of some of these traditional philosophies to the systems of governance that we have. I know we're talking about endogenous systems generally today, but just to think about, are these systems actually applicable, or is it something that becomes a challenge when we think about the societies that we live in today? But before we go there, Marshall, you had a question on the Constitution?
OK. Merci. Je crois que c'est Ibrahim qui pose la question sur la Constitution.
Ibrahim has raised this question.
Comme on est dans le long terme, on va
are in the long term, so we don't have much distance from what we are discussing. A constitution needs a way of supreme legitimacy.
On a besoin de les écrire dans le sens des écritures qu'on connaît aujourd'hui, en particulier quand il y a eu beaucoup de changements, des révolutions,
we had lots of revolutions, changes.
La Grande-Bretagne, par exemple,
in Great Britain, they don't have a constitution.
Donc, ça veut dire que fondamentalement, ce n'est pas la Constitution.
Essentially, it's not the written Constitution that is key, but we need to have in a community a set of rules that are supreme and according to which we judge everything else and we manage everything else. And my proposal here is to read a number of artifacts that we underestimate as being ways of scriptures, of writings that could work as a constitution, but they need to be legitimized. When we talk about our cultural objects in European museums, here is our sociability. We see men and societies that are hosted in
Ce sont ces discours-là qui doivent être relégitimés.
And it's this sort of discourse of narrative that needs to be legitimized.
Certaines sociétés les ont de façon formelle, mais ce n'est pas ça le plus important. On peut avoir des constitutions et des sociétés dysfonctionnelles. On peut avoir des
dysfunctional societies, and we can have constitutions that are not respected by anyone, or having constitutions that are not respected even by those who wrote them. It's not the Constitution that makes sociability. We need to find elements that are consensual and that can put at the forefront of our societies the values that are key. The African Union has a predisposition, this chart of saying that each human life is worth another human life. This is the chart of money, and Africa needs to defend these points. And not only against
so a short question.
Foreigners, but among themselves. Sorry for being too long.
And I wanted to go on that. So thank you very much for that. Okay. I do want to go to Ibrahim because now, as people are speaking, one of the things that it strikes me is that we are talking about, in some ways, very different systems, in some ways, with different priorities. They're coming out of, and as you illustrated, very rich philosophies. And yet somehow we have to look across and make them speak to each other. So I had asked you a question about commonalities and differences and what it is that we can learn from them. And I want to especially, as you give that answer, think about consensus building. Because otherwise we will all be fighting and saying, my system is the best and my system is the one that has to be there. But also that these systems are about helping us build consensus, as we live in the society that we have today and we plan for the future. So take me to that. Help me think this through.
Who starts? I think
I want Ibrahim to start. Let Ibrahim start and then I'll open it out.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Un très bon défi et
that's a good challenge, and the topic on which we are working, my brother Ali has approached these aspects when we met, and it was a big challenge. At our level here, our chance, comparing to other contexts or subcontexts in Africa, it's that in Mali, in the 13th century, from the 1200s to today, there's an evolution. Even if at certain points we had to hide it to survive, because, for example, at the moment of resistance to colonial penetration and the moment of rebellion between the two world wars, and at the highest of the independent movements here, the ideas that were protecting this system, those who were protesting were sent in exile or killed. The first common cause is that despite the difficulties of history, the tragic moments, all that we have experienced, African people have organized themselves, mobilized themselves to survive. And for me, this is absolutely fundamental. We found a way of reaffirm our position in the world, not only in terms of culture and civilization, but in terms of instrument of management of society, of political tools. The other political systems imposed to us are very violent, that have tried to make us disappear. So for us, it's a victory, and it's common to the whole of Africa and to the diaspora. The second element is that internally, if I compare the Mali situation to Romanian, the trigger that have brought people to redefine themselves seems to be at the coming out of a large crisis. In Somalia, the hair system with the different tribes that wanted to go to war. And the starting point is always concerning an internal crisis. We had to refine ourselves and want to enhance our society and also to manage the conflicts in terms of power. The third element that seems common to all is that there's a fluidity that follows life. If I compare certain processes that I followed, in which I participated, I took part, that I studied in detail, the French and American systems, they are not sufficiently fluid. And society sometimes moves on into certain domains, and it takes some delay because there are so many things that we need to validate politically and administratively, that what the population wants is hooked by those who detain power, and the idea that texts are not yet in place. And in our ways of seeing things, even if it's written, the chart, the dinner, it's written in the theocracies in Nigeria and in Niger, it's written in Congo, it's written, but it's very flexible and very lively compared to the contemporary models in our republic. That's where there's some sort of irony. When Africa has moved to Western democracies, the apparatus was very, very heavy and touching dictatorship. The idea would be to go in the sense of the ancient systems and to include the whole of population. These are the three main references I wanted to make. And the last one is that the notion that everyone has a voice. At any moment, the land citizen can protest as a woman or as a young person, a marginalized or not influenced, to find a way of rebalance things.
So the purpose is to prevent people from seizing power. Each and every one stakeholder can have their voice heard, unlike many other models where there are many procedures. There is a Senate, we need to undergo many steps, and this is what I wanted to say.
Particular question, something adding and not just agreeing, so that we can at least take, I've got a couple more questions, and one is of clarification, so I do want to come to it. Yeah. And then the conversation will continue tomorrow. But if you have something burning that you have to say, 1 minute each, please. Okay. Ali, go ahead, and then I'll come to Mashallah and Zalela.
Yes, no, I think it's important, of course, to draw the and to discuss the commonalities and differences of these different systems that we have presented today. And just I would like to say more or less the same thing that Ibrahim has said, but in another way. I think it's important for the Monday Charter and the hair, at least it's clear it was after a very, very violent conflict that this really was created. So it is a response to regain, I mean, to coming back to the rule of law. So it's very important. That the second one is this preoccupation and the concern about the consensus building, unanimity in the decision taking, not excluding people, taking the necessary time until we reach an acceptable consensus. I think this is something that is more or less common in the Gada system presented by Zelalem and other systems. The patience until we reach a unanimity and playing the exclusive. That is not the case. I mean, in the bureaucratic and democratic system in which we are living in our country. The third one is this framework, ethical and conceptual framework and theoretical framework that is always behind any actions and any feature of this system. It's not something that's like that. You see the theoretical and conceptual ground which is accompanying, and when you ask it to the elders, they are so articulated in explaining why this happened and all the explanations. This is something, and they know. Because, sometimes to some our politicians, you can ask what a meaning about democracy, even can't recall all the background, constitutional background of the system is serving. So this is very important. Another one is the term or the mandate. The Gada system it's clear in the Gada system, in the charter and in the health. The role is a mandate, is a term, is not something, is not a privilege, is not something that you inherited from your parents. It is something that is based on your merit, and you are given a term, and there is a rotation. The rotation. It's not the modern democracy that only are aware of the idea of rotation. You exercise the power a certain period, and then you give to others, and then you can become an advisor or an elder who can help, but not keeping the power forever. And this is very important. And finally, the education, the age group, all these intermediate groups that are building, the conscience, the awareness, and accompanying the development, in the Mondays charter, in the Gada system, you have these steps you learn, and you have time to learn, and this civic education to really build to familiarize the young generation to play the role as the citizen of this system. It is also very important. And yes, I think that is the commonalities that I see from all what we have listened to today.
Thank you very much. Martial and Zelalem, do you want to add? And this I'm asking you to add, not to elaborate or to say it in another way, because I have a couple of other questions I do want to get to before the top of the hour.
Okay, I'll try to add very few things. I draw from Ali and Ibrahim that the social order is something which is not natural and is not something that we have to take as something which comes from, from nowhere, and we have to accept it. And particularly, all the values that are behind the institutions must be discussed. And those values start by the first value. If we take the contemporary order, the first value, which has the dominant place today, which has been coined around the 18th century, is not the idea of human being, it's the idea of the individual. It is not the same thing. So conceptually, individual and human being is not the same thing. African people talk about la personne, people, human beings. The Monday Charter talks about people, animals, nature, etc. So we have to question, or I would say, a whole device that is behind the institution, that is behind building institution. And for me, the life is the minimum and the basic. And we should have work at that level and work with ethical, grounded elite, which is extremely difficult. I would just stop there.
Okay.
Because there are many things that we could say.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Zelalem, I don't see your hand, so I'm going to assume you don't want to contribute to that. What I want to do is, I think this is so rich, and we will continue to have this conversation. And what I'd love to do is to go around all the panelists that we have today. I want to give each of you a couple of minutes. I see that there are a couple of questions. Ali Musa, somebody wants to know if Sharia has learned from the hair. There's a question, I think it's a general question, and we seem to be using these terms. I know it's been directed to Martial, but maybe we want anybody who wants to can comment in their 2 minutes. Between, this endogenous, so in English, endogenous systems of governance and indigenous systems of governance. In French, that's the gouvernance endogène and la gouvernance ancestrale. And whether they are the same thing, if they mean something different, I'm going to just throw out that there. But as you do that, and I'm going to just put it out there, and everybody can do what they want with their 2 to 3 minutes. One of the questions that has been running right through the discussions today is this question of how are African endogenous governance systems defined and shaped by traditional philosophies and values. And I know that there's been a couple of you have actually already commented on this. Ali Musa, for example, suggested that actually they are not. We know the philosophies are there, but we're not actually applying them. So I also want to throw that out. How are these traditional philosophies, are they even continuing to inform either the systems that are happening in societies or in general? And then just make your closing remarks. I'll give each of you 2 minutes so that we can end on the top of the hour, so that tomorrow we can all come back fresh and pick up on these conversations again. I don't know if any one of you wants to start. Augustin, and I see you've joined us. Let me start with you.
I will just make a quick comment on we call it arrow of time, meaning the chronological framework of African history. In general history of Africa, we're working on, we try to put in place a timeline, a reading of African history that is not dependent on our encounter with Europe. So we have simply divided, and I do feel that is the framework we have to adopt from now on, and remove terms like tribes or whatever from our lexicon. Tribu in French is so irritating when I read it. So let's say I have 2 minutes. So in terms of a framework of African history, instead of having prehistory and history, because, as Sarkozy will say, we have not entered history yet. But that's his problem. It is not ours. So we have the initial history of Africa, which is from early humans, the early tools, to we have to put it a boundary somewhere, but it will be ancient Egypt. It is very long, but it is what we can do so now, not to go in technical terms. And then after the initial history, we have ancient history of Africa, from ancient Egypt to the encounter with Asia first and Europe second. And after that, we enter in what we call modern history of Africa, which is up to the brutal encounter with Europe. And then we have a contemporary history of Africa. We start with, depending where we take it, from independence to today. The advantage of us reading of history is that we do not have a before and after. Human history is a continuum. And we don't have to rely on pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial, because we are imprisoned in European history of time. This is not ours. And so that's what we have suggested. Hopefully the volume will be published soon. Our timeline in African history has to be free of Eurocentric perspective on our continent. So that's the only comment I want to do at this stage. And I do think that we will spread it out so that the term like colonial, post-colonial, pre-colonial will go in history books and will not be part of our vocabulary when we are talking about the history of Africa.
Thank you very, very much. That's a really important reminder that you have given us. Okay, thank you. I see my brother Yoporeka was next. I don't know if I can see he's muted.
What is he?
Okay. While I'm waiting to see him come back up, I see he's on, but he's muted and his screen has gone dark. Why don't I come to Zelalem, Ibrahim, Marshall? Which one of you would like to go next? Ali
Each
Musa?
of us, the one who wants.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Okay, for Diran, who says, is there a difference in French between endogenous and indigenous, which is in fact endogène et indigène. En fait, en français, les travaux en français ont été lents à adopter cette problématique-là, même si bon, on sait que les travaux déjà
lagging behind. It was slow, but we know that there were work.
Déjà la question de l'endogène.
For example, the research of Donji, where we tackled the issue of endogenous governance, and it was very precise. We said that endogenous took place in one given culture. It's not necessarily very ancient or very traditional, but it goes back to objectives, necessities, goals.
Donc ça peut être traditionnel.
So it can be traditional, but it can also be not traditional. There are also many contemporary innovations which relate to today's Africa. They are not necessarily traditionals, but they are not necessarily Western either. I know that Diran doesn't truly understand because he's an expert in innovation, but if you look at the systems of mobile phones, we talked about reverse innovation because all the tools had been designed first for the US, but the ones who adopted them first were people in Africa, especially Kenyans. So it became an endogenous innovation. And this is why there is a difference between endogenous and traditional.
Dans le traditionnel, même si dans l'endogène en général,
there is a relationship. Although with endogenous, there is some sort of transaction between what is old and what is new.
Quelle est la perspective et dans quel intérêt on le fait?
What we need to remember most is what is the prospect and what is the interest. If we do it in the interest of the whole population, it is interesting in my view. As regards the other question,
qu'est-ce qui nous reste de notre tradition? Je vais le dire en assez rapide.
What do we remember? What do we keep from our tradition? I'm going to be brief.
Par les ethnologues, les anthropologues, etc.
Ethnologists, anthropologists looked into it closely.
Pays que je ne citerai pas parce que je suis un très mauvais ethnologue.
A series of countries which I won't mention.
De plus en plus grande entre les positions
we see that there is an overlap between
les positions de pouvoir
the positions of political powers and the positions of traditional powers. In other words, we see that some figures who are politicians
deviennent des personnalités
move on to traditional spheres.
Comme s'il y avait une forme d'instrumentalisation.
All this happens as if there were
les aspects du pouvoir qui permettent d'accéder et d'accroître du pouvoir, justement.
Instrumentalization.
Mais une forme de relégation des traditions qui sont beaucoup plus exigeantes, parce qu'il faut rappeler quand même, je crois que Yoporeka ne démentira pas, que le pharaon avait un rituel de
if I remember well, the pharaoh had a ritual to reinvigorate, and the pharaoh could die in this process.
Que quand on dit qu'on est chef au sens africain,
we should also recall that when we are deemed to be a leader in Africa, there are some moments when the leader fails, he has to be sanctioned. And this disappears little by little. We see that powers are accumulated, and there is also a corruption of endogenous practices.
Yeah.
just going to be very tired. And Martial, you've illustrated even the difficulty of translation, even between languages, just with those two little words. So thank you for your understanding. I know we've all got so much to say. My brother, Yoporeka.
OK, thank you. Je vais rebondir sur ce que Zebelinga.
I'd like to say something about what Zebelinga said, and I'd like to go back to this session today. I saw that there were many similarities in everything we said. This is obvious. So we can see that there is complementarity in spite of differences according to regions. We see that there is diversity, but it's only a superficial diversity. And this inspires me to say that in terms of theory, there is unity in terms of culture as well. Therefore, I think that in the moment we live right now, we see that there is a deficit of theory. We need to have more theory. We need to theorize not only in politics, but also beyond. So we see that we repeat something. We are actually acting. We are just playing. We're just playing scenarios. And this is that, I think that this is a huge tragedy in our continent. We need to have a thinking process rather than copying what we are told. In any case, I'm delighted to have had this moment with my dear colleagues. And I think that to finish, I want to focus on the need of having a thinking process. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm really enjoying the response and also comparison on the reflection. Thank you for that. I would like to say that Martial's response was perfectly right. I do have similar understanding of indigenous and endogenous. In fact, one may claim that there is no indigenous as such because every culture really have intercultural communications and so on and so forth. So there is no purity in knowledge. There is syncretism like in religion. So likewise, so knowledge can be brought from the West, from the East, and so on and so forth. So then we can call it endogenous because it's not purely one. But when one community really stick to it and practice it for a longer period of time and known as really want to be recognized as such as well, then we can say that it's indigenous. If particular groups stick to that value, practice for a longer period of time, qualify as if it is theirs, like there in Somali, Gada, in Rome, and so on and so forth. So then we call that that particular local practice as indigenous. But other things will be added over the one that already exists. Application, really, what I would like to stress is that we know that we all are educated almost in a Western educational system. So whether we are trained in the West or we brought curriculum from the West, we are the product of a product. We cannot deny that. What we have learned is we are learning our culture, and we learned the philosophies of the West. We can't deny it. Can we format it is my question. Can we format and then have an application of the local knowledge that we have really been discussing? That challenge has been brought in Ethiopian context to be specific, that can we really make use of Geda in 21st century? Can we make use of Geda in 21st century? There are some values that we cannot really implement nowadays. So we cannot really bring it forward for different reasons. It's almost obsolete. But there are values still that are relevant, even more important than the Western values like democracy or the governance system, the constitution, and the one Marshall was saying, the written constitution of the UK and so on. So the same thing is true in the case of that. So yes, we can, but how we can do that? We have to really include in the curriculum. So I have been part of the curriculum designing team formed by the regional government, to be specific, and I'll make it precise. We designed a very first curriculum that from early grade 1 to grade 8, and it will continue to the higher school, the high school as well, that the students should take a GEDA course as one mandatory course. They play with the stories, the myths, the ideas with nature. So it's a different curriculum. Up to some complex structures when they reach 5th and 6th and so on and so forth. From that on, we also try to design a different judicial system, which is almost independent and autonomous, run by the local elders. We do have 5,000 small villages. On all small villages, there will be customary courts. Maybe in thousands, they are already there. Maybe in the future, we will have thousands of customary courts, which really use customary dispute resolution mechanism only. They apply customary rules. They entertain cases without the normal court proceedings, but with their own customs, specific to that local community. So application requires really a robust thing. It will not be only academic exercise, but of course, academics do have a lot to do. And to make it really short, this is all I can say. I'm happy to be part of this discussion. And if I took a lot of time, sorry.
No. And thank you very much. You've really enriched the discussion and we continue to look forward to that engagement. Ibrahim?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Bon, au Mali, nous sommes en pleine guerre, mais nous sommes aussi en pleine refondation.
I don't know if you are following the news in Mali, but we are in war but also in superation of challenge. So I'm happy to be participating in this movement. We have brought ancient theories based on two pillars. There is a theory of life that is opposing a theory of death. And we have theorized life. That's what allows us to exist. But lives that is maintained by a theory of community against the theory of individuals. So we have life and community, and it's according to these two poles that we want to redress the full system. And this is a link, a bond with the chart book, the Co-Convened. For example, if we look at recent developments, people are surprised that the president that has been elected and is popular, 2 months before the end of his term, there was a coup against him. And we have ejected him because we were always lucky to have at the heart of community the representation at the 4 segments, men, women, young, and elderly. And this has allowed for a distanciation between the population and the authorities. We have, for example, a tribal leader or a community leader, we can distance ourselves, and we need to rebuild Mali on a base that is more endogenous than the rest. That's the via that we are following. Everything is very politicized, and we need to reconstruct ourselves on that basis. Are we using it? Is it still alive? Of course it is. There was never a break but more and more we are going back to endogenous. That every 7 years we make the balance. We have this practice in political terms. The set of representatives in the provinces, we sit together and we ask ourselves, what are we keeping? What are we discarding? What is new that we should incorporate? And what should we get rid of? And at the level of Co-Convened, we always have the leverage to allow us to refer to endogenous, but it's not ancestral. We always try to discuss what we need to readjust, what we need to integrate and discard. Last point is the fact that we always took the time, and according to the testimony, we have time to focus on the construction of the person, not only on material well-being or career, but the well-being in terms of the emotional aspect and the spiritual aspect of the individual. And the physical, to eat and drink, to have internet, but we also have to have someone that can blossom, that can prosper, who lives in a space with no pollution, that has quality of life. Vous avez
to give the last word on the panel to Ali, Musa. Yeah, and I think that's fitting, because the inspiration for us being here together actually came from him. So Ali, Musa? Ali?
He's lost.
He's lost?
Sorry.
Okay, there he is.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
He's here.
No, it's okay. I am here. I'm going to speak in French to
I'd like to answer to the question that has been addressed by Phil Islam on the hair. It's the opposite that happened. The hair has been created in the 17th century. They knew the legislation and the Muslim law, and they have created hair. They have reinterpreted and adopted the Sharia from Islam in their context and adapting it to their needs. And this interpretation of the Sharia is historical in the sense that it shows us how the Sharia and the founders of hair had the intelligence of adapting it to their context and to their needs. So it's to study the way in which hair has reinterpreted the great texts and the interpretation of the law of the Sharia.
The use of the revalorization of this kind of indigenous system of governance there is, I can say, two risks for that. And I think tomorrow we will see with the presentation of the experience in a concrete context in Somaliland, Botswana, in Rwanda, and in the African diaspora. The first one is the risk of that this system be only used as an instrument or an instrumental function of this system, forgetting that what is much more important for us is less the tools that they provide than the philosophy and the methodology that can inspire us. So I think the tools is something that is contextualized and that is related to the specific context, but the philosophy and methodology of decision making, consensus building, minority protection can be still, I think, useful, and we can draw a lot of lessons from that. So avoiding the instrumentalistic exploitation of this. The second risk is the instrumentalization by the modern government of this tradition. And Martial have already mentioned that. And in many countries, the modern government try to administratively rule the functioning of this traditional power. And in fact, by doing this, what they only retain is the structure of the power. Not all what we have talked about which is the philosophical, ethical background, only the structure of the power, and they try to make a kind of administrative decree to try to organize this. So something that is flexible, that is, as we said, moving and that adapting to the different conditions has been made to be very fixed, static by administrative law. And I think that is not a good direction to go. And we know some of the problems that this way of proceeding have created already in Africa, because then by administratively establishing a structure of power, you create competition, you create a struggle for power, which did not exist in the traditional system. And my last point is how we can use this kind of system. And I think, you see, today there is a kind of separation. When we talk about that kind of system, we talk, it's only anthropologists, only ethnologists who talk about that. And then in the social and human science, it is completely separated from the philosophy, for instance, and from economy, from sociology. So, and I think this separation and division of the way of conceiving the knowledge is also a very Eurocentric, and we have to go beyond that. Not only the timeline that Augustin have mentioned, but also the specification and how we divided the knowledge. So, for instance, why we don't talk about this ethical framework and theoretical framework that we are all talking about in the philosophy courses or in the economy? Because in this system, there is also a very economical basis to see how we share the resources, how we distribute the resources, how to get some taxes and to redistribute and ensure the vital aspect of the society. So we need to better integrate this knowledge into the whole system of knowledge in our countries, and especially at the university. And of course at the high schools and the primary schools, where we have also to teach. And I'm very happy to know that in Ethiopia, in the Oromo region, they have already begun to integrate this into curricula. So we have to do that kind of integration to promote this indigenous system of governance.